Thank you, all of you who have participated in my presentation on resilience a few weeks back. This is very different, so there's very little overlap, maybe one slide that I've shown before. And I've given this presentation in the community a few times, but it's always different because we learn new things all the time. And really, I want to give you the impression that that we update from what other people do in terms of research and our own research too. So I hope you're all healthy, because this is the topic here today: healthy keys to healthy aging and keys to healthy longevity. Maybe I can reinforce some of the things that you're doing and make you think about some of the things that perhaps you're not doing, but may want to do in the future. So here's a brief overview of the types of things I want to talk about today. I will briefly discuss what we understand healthy longevity to be, brief definitions. As scholars, in aging and in gerontology, we always like to emphasize some of the demographic changes that have implications for longevity. So I will show just a couple of slides on that. But primarily, I want to share with you some of the lessons that we have learned in my lab and internationally in the research groups that I'm involved in about healthy aging and healthy longevity. So I'll spend most of my time on that. And if there is time at the end, if there's time, I will share the secret of longevity with you. So we'll see how we're doing. And then, of course, I'll finish with a brief summary up in here. Now, I know some of you are still reading the paper. I know a lot of people don't anymore, but if you looked last weekend in the Des Moines Register or in the Ames Tribune, you will have seen one part that's always inserted in the papers, the parade. And the topic this week was on how to live to 100 plus. And it has a number of suggestions in there, popular suggestions on what to do and how to stay healthy and how to make it to 100, to look as vibrant and as healthy as this woman does here on the cover, the 105-year-old sprinter, Ida Keeling, who says she's running from old age. I'm not sure we have to run from old age. I think we want to run healthily to old age, but that's my perspective on it. The people who are featured on there, some of them are my good friends, Tom Pearls from Boston, and of course feature of the Blue Zones, which we've covered here in Ames with some presenters as well. So there's a lot of good information covered in here, and some of that overlaps in here, but I will be more on the science side of it and tell you what the evidence is, rather than just the pointers that are featured in Parade magazine. But if you haven't looked at it, you may want to quickly have a look. So what is healthy longevity? Well, healthy longevity, the way we think about it, really has two components. The first one, obviously, is to live long, or live longer than perhaps your life expectancy. And I don't know, I can't see you right now, but I suspect that most of you have probably outlived already average life expectancy. Because if you are older than 67 or 68, you have outlived the average life expectancy for your cohort. And so if you're in your 70s or 80s, that part of healthy longevity already applies to you. You have an increased life expectancy, and more on that in just a minute. But of course, longevity itself is not the goal. And our research, although we do ask people often, why did you live so long? What is your secret of longevity? Our primary goal is to make sure that people who live for a long time live healthily a long time, that they stay healthy just as long as possible. And so that is certainly something we want to emphasize. And I take it that emergency flashing that you saw was just a technical issue. Everything looks fine here. So living longer and living well is really what we want to emphasize. More recently, people use the term health span to emphasize we want a long lifespan, and we want that to be very, very healthy. So even though that's not a term in the dictionary yet, scientists often talk about health span and really mean what can we do to optimize our healthy lifespan. And there's a lot that we can do, as you will see today. It's not all just good luck or genes, as some people might suspect. So let me briefly talk about demographic changes that we have seen and we will continue to see. And there are really two aspects that are important. I think certainly the first one is most likely not new to you. Population is aging the world over. So everywhere in the world, life expectancy is increasing. The percentage of older people is increasing in society. And that is a phenomenon that some people have talked about and have really called the social revolution of the 21st century. And we're just beginning to see some of these effects. The age group of what we call oldest old, now defined as people 90 years and older, is the fastest growing segment of our population. The data that we use still today are primarily from the 2010 census. You can imagine that we're eagerly awaiting the results of the 2020 census when we will update some of the data that will be coming in. But here's just to show in a quick graph of what we are noticing, the trends that we're noticing from 1980 to 2020, 2030 now, and in the future to 2050. And you may notice here in 1980, we did not have too many people who were 90 years and older. There were some, obviously. This gray line here is the group 90 to 94-year-olds, but there's almost nobody visible in the 95 to 99 age group, and the same certainly for centenarians. But then you can see as we move from 1980 to 2013 to 2030, so in a few years, in 10 years' time, you will see that we have what we call an inflection point, that we are going to have a dramatic increase in the population that's 90 years and older. And by the year 2050, we expect 68 million people if you add those three together, that will be 90 years and older. Of course, the largest group is between 90 and 94. It's also a substantial increase from almost nobody to more than 10 million people who will be 95 to 99 years old. And compared to those two groups, of course, centenarians are still not showing up much. But if you just look at centenarians, you'll also notice that we have the same dramatic increase here for centenarians, about just 53,000 centenarians worldwide in 1980, and that will increase to more than 3.3 million people who will be 100 years and older by the year 2050. In the last number that we have for centenarians in the United States is 72,000 centenarians. The 2010 census had about 54,000. So you can see in just 4 years, we increased here in the United States from 54 to 72,000 centenarians. And I expect by the time next year that we get census data on centenarians here in the United States, we'll have more than 80,000 centenarians. So that's more than 1.5 times as many centenarians as there were in the whole world just in 1980. So a dramatic increase in the oldest old, 90 years and older, in centenarians, people who are 100 years and older. And some people have used these data to indicate that paying attention to aging, healthy aging, and paying attention to the oldest old in particular, and centenarians, is imperative. So this has often been called the demographic imperative. It is imperative for us to do something to prepare for this major increase in the population of old and very, very old people, whether it is with regard to Social Security, whether it is with regard to work and retirement, and certainly with regard to health. Because as I indicated in the beginning, we don't want to just have a large number of centenarians and nonagenarians, people in their 90s. We want to have healthy people. We want to keep people healthy. And so it is imperative for not only society, but for all of us to do what we can to stay healthy, because we can all expect to live much longer than people in the past have. And it is our responsibility to really take care of that. Another way of looking at that is to look at life expectancy. Here's some life expectancy data to look at. I have a rank order here of the top 10 countries in the world. Depends on sometimes the source that you're looking at. In most sources, you will see that Japan ranks number 1 in life expectancy for men, and number 2 for women. 84.6 years for men is the average, and 87.3 years for women is the average in Japan. Which is why I've spent considerable amount of time in Japan. As Vicky indicated, I was fortunate to have a Fulbright scholarship that brought me to Japan in 2014, and I've been back every year since as a visiting professor to the University of Osaka, trying to learn what Japan does that we are perhaps not doing, and I'll share some of my findings and results with you in a little bit. You can see there are a couple of smaller places, Andorra, Singapore, Hong Kong, that are on top, but there's also Italy, Sweden, Australia, Switzerland coming up quickly in the top 10. But another thing I want you to pay attention to is, of course, where we are in the United States. We rank currently 43rd in the world out of about 190 countries in life expectancy, with an average of 78.87. These are very recent numbers, I think last year for men, and 81.1 for women. Ranking much lower than the top 10. We used to be in the top 10, and doesn't matter who you talk to, but we don't like to be 43rd in anything when we look at the United States. So we have to ask ourselves, why is it that here in the United States we rank so low in life expectancy? As a matter of fact, for the last 3 or 4 years, I think 3 out of the last 4 years, life expectancy in the United States has been decreasing. And there are a number of reasons for that that I'll get into in just a little bit. Most every country is increasing. We are losing ground. As I said, the United States used to be in the top 10 of life expectancy. Now we're falling to 43, and it's one of the only countries in the world that has decreased in life expectancy in the last five years. As a matter of fact, as I updated these numbers, I had to downgrade them. It was 79 some and 82 some for women. So we are decreasing in life expectancy. So not necessarily a good example of longevity, and maybe not even of healthy longevity that we'll have to think about. Of course, life expectancy is only one of the aspects that we like to look at. Lifespan is the other one. So the question, how long is it possible to live for human beings? And in order to look at what is the potential of people living longer than just the average life expectancy, because average means that 50% of a generation, of a cohort, makes it to that time, but there's another 50% that lives much longer. And so the oldest ever living person, documented well, is Madame Camon from France, who lived up to 122 years and 164 days. Here you see her, I think when she was about 120 years old, still in fairly good health, cognitively functioning. She had some hearing problems. I think that was her primary problem that she had. And she noticed that an occasional glass of port wine, along with a diet that was rich in olive oil, were the keys to her longevity. And some of that, certainly the olive oil-based diet, refers to the Mediterranean diet, and I will get back to that in just a little bit as well. You see some photos here of her when she was 40 years old in 1915, and then she was 120 years old in 1995. Now, I know some of you follow the news quite avidly, so you may have seen recently, maybe last year or so, some news reports that there may be some question of whether she actually got to be this old, or whether Madame Camon took the identity of her daughter, and that she actually only made it to about 100. But there is really very, very good research, published research, peer-reviewed research that indicates these data are correct. There is no chance that this woman, Madame Camon, changed her identity and therefore made up her longevity, and that is only a few journalists who like this story to keep going. But again, just in all fairness, there is that image still out there. Did she really get to be that old? But 122 years old is a lot older than 100. It's 22 more years. You make it to 100 and you're saying, oh my gosh, there's still 20% of my life left. But there are other good examples of people who live to very, very old age. The oldest currently person is somebody from Japan, Her name is Kane Tanaka, and she is alive at 117 years. It's not 122, but certainly pushing it closer to 120 with every day that she's still alive. And then, given that we had Madame Carmont from France, you see in rank 2 and 3 currently 2 other French women, Lucille Rendon and Jeanne Bart from France, who are currently alive at 116 and 115. Anybody over 110 is referred to as a super centenarian. And again, we are thinking there's some research out there that life at 110, 115 yet is different than life at 100, and certainly different than at age 90 or age 80. You will notice that all our record holders currently, and have been for many, many years, women. We track men separately, but they do not get close to 117 or 116. And so, again, we'll have to look at the gender aspect of longevity in just a little bit as well. Kane Tanaka from Japan was asked, like everybody who makes it to the #1 rank, what she attributed her longevity to, and she indicated that it was because of her faith in God. So religiosity, not something that we have focused on probably enough as researchers, but the spirituality, religiosity does seem to play a major role in many centenarians if you talk to them. So unfortunately, this is a slide when I give my presentations regularly that I have to change most often, because if you're 117, 116, you're not going to stay there for very, very long until and unless you are another Jean Carmont. And so obviously you are at the very, very end of your possible biological lifespan. Now, some of you know that I have worked with centenarians, people 100 years and older, for many, many years, more than 30 years now, and I'm going to have to stay with it. As the older I get, the more interesting it actually gets for me, because I learn a lot about aging that I could personally benefit from. But here are some of the studies that I've been involved in, and some which I have led. So the Georgia Centenarian Study is one of the primary centenarian studies in the world that I started out with in 1988. We studied 137 centenarians at that time. We actually followed up 55 of those 137 centenarians after 20 months to see are there any late life changes in those people who are still alive. And then we started an entirely new study with 287 centenarians in 2002. And this study had very, very complex components. We have a very detailed genetic profile of these centenarians. We actually asked them whether they would be willing to donate their brains. So we have a brain bank of centenarians somewhere in Kentucky. We looked at their detailed cognitive and functional abilities, and then their psychosocial resources. Of course, when I came to Iowa in 1991, we immediately started the rural aging study, which contained 104 centenarians and nonagenarians. Second study we started in 2001 with 153 centenarians, and then I've been working with centenarians in Japan and Iowa, a comparison, and that study is ongoing. So far, we have collected data from 55 centenarians there. I've also been involved with my work in Japan, looking at Tokyo centenarians, 304 that we've studied. I spent some time in Heidelberg in the 1990s, and we collected data from 91 centenarians. And more recently, we have looked at what's called the Health and Retirement Study. It's probably the largest aging study in the United States that is conducted by the National Institutes of Health. Every 2 years, longitudinal data, and we thought we would never be able to really get good longitudinal data that would tell us what it takes to make it, let's say, from 70 or 80 to 100, because you'd have to have a very, very large number. Well, this study had a large number of about 20,000 people that they interviewed and tested in 1992, and it turns out that by now, studying them since 1992, every 2 years, 164 out of those original 20,000 people made it to 100. So we can actually compare, and we have compared these 164 centenarians with those who did not make it to 100. And at the end of my presentation, I'll show you some very first results that come from this particular study. So there are at least 1,350 nonagenarians and centenarians who my lab has studied, but who's counting? We're not done yet. We're still at the beginning of it. And you'll see in these pictures some of those centenarians we were fortunate to visit in Georgia, here in Iowa, in Japan, in India, and in other parts of Germany and other parts of the world. So I want to look at some of the content areas of what keys to healthy longevity are with some quotes from centenarians, letting them speak first before I show you what we found out. So here, a centenarian who was asked, how did I get so old? I don't know why. I'm just busy. Another person who indicated moderation. I never smoked or drank. I eat everything that civilized people eat. And I'm still wondering today what civilized means here, but you be the judge. And then a third centenarian who said, I may be here tomorrow morning, I may not be. I have nothing to say about that. Tomorrow is another day. These are fairly typical quotes from centenarians that we have interviewed and visited. Really staying active is what this first one indicates. If you stop being active, you stop in many ways living already. And so keeping busy, staying active is indeed very, very important. We do know that moderation in drinking, eating is very, very important. Staying away from smoking, again, you'll see the evidence later on. And then, taking a day at a time is really what we hear centenarians saying very, very often as well. So one of the questions I like to ask centenarians and older people in general is what is life like? And we don't discriminate. We don't just go to the best of the best. We basically interview and talk to people so long as we're allowed to, whoever we find. And so when we ask people, what is it like to be 100? They give us their qualitative answer, but we also basically ask them, is it very positive? Is it very negative? Or are you sort of in between? And I think the news is really quite good, and it really matches my impression when I visit centenarians. There are very few centenarians who say, this is not worth it. There are some, as you can see, a few people here who we have interviewed. These are Iowa data that I'm sharing with you, who feel very negative about it. And of course, it's a lot of the limitations that they have. And then the rest is half and half. About 50%, every second centenarian says, well, this is very positive. I really am still enjoying myself. I really enjoy life. And then there are some people who realistically say, well, it's in between. There are some good things, and there are some things that are not so good. But of course, we want more people to be in this category, feeling good about being 100 and feeling that life is still worth living at that particular age. Here's a typical example of a centenarian in her answer to what is it like to be 100. Oh, it's pretty gracious. I enjoy it. I don't feel like I'm 100. And so, again, the fact that there are things that you can enjoy at any age, certainly still at 100 too. So the first thing I want to talk about, one of the lessons learned, is what we call personality and longevity. We always talk about centenarians are unique. Centenarians must be different in some way. And so the key that we thought to longevity, and certainly perhaps unique to our lab here at Iowa State compared to some of the other labs around the world, is that we are focusing on personality. And so we have assessed personality. We have talked with people about who they are as a person. Here's an Iowa State alumni who used to be on the wrestling team at Iowa State and was, I believe, when we interviewed him, 102, and still had amazing strength that he showed, and certainly a good attitude. This is my assistant, Peggy, who came with me to interview this gentleman. And it's really these, what we call big five personality traits that play a role, and that we see so characteristic in many, certainly not all, but certainly in many centenarians. They tend to be more extroverted, outgoing. They like to be with people. Certainly when we visit, we notice this. They're not shy. They are easily engaged in the conversation. We notice that centenarians are very conscientious. They really still at 100 want to take care of their affairs. They're very peculiar about what they eat and how much they exercise and a routine that they have. And if you make an appointment with them, you better show up on time. Or here in Iowa, certainly, better show up 5 minutes early, because that's what they're expecting you. When I go and visit centenarians in care facilities, often they're in the waiting hall, sitting there, and I try to be at least 5 minutes early, and they're already ready and lead me to their room. And so very, very conscientious individuals, very stable people. They don't worry a whole lot about things. And more so, a lot of centenarians tell me, I don't like to be around people who worry a lot, who are anxious. I like to be around positive, optimistic people. And that's sort of a stable, emotionally stable characteristic, and that's what we see in many, many centenarians. And contrary to what many people believe stereotypically about old age, they are very agreeable people. They are not contentious, and they don't like to quarrel a lot. Yes, they get frustrated, as we all do at times. But if you ask them to do certain things, they are more likely to do it because they are very, very agreeable people. So and they are open to new experiences. So this cluster of being open, outgoing, conscientious, reliable person, emotionally stable and agreeable is what we call the resilient or robust personality. And that's what I talked about at my last presentation here, to talk about resiliency, because it's not only works for centenarians. Really, when we talk about the current crisis of COVID-19, all of those will help. Being conscientious means you do wear your mask. Being conscientious means that you do only go out when you need to go shopping. Agreeable means you agree with recommendations that are being made by public health. And so high scores on that certainly help. Being open to this new times and not wanting to go back immediately to what it was like a year ago certainly also helps. Extroversion is a little bit more problematic, because if you are cooped in at home, it's more difficult to get out. But fortunately, we have learned to use technology to be and to become more extroverted, so that's certainly helpful too. And then certainly being emotionally stable, being able to weather the storm, as it were. All of those are resilience personalities or robust personalities that are survivorship traits, and that really help with healthy longevity and healthy aging. Keeping stress levels down, of course, there's a certain amount that we can avoid. Some stresses we cannot avoid, obviously, and we have to deal with them. Then we need to be active in coping with it, doing something about it. And then centenarians often tell me that, yes, they will deal with any problem that comes their way, but there are some things they will not change. If your eyesight is very, very bad, if you're almost blind, nobody's going to make you see and read the newspaper again tomorrow. So you have to accept and adjust to that. Accept what you cannot change is what often centenarians tell us. This is really the big cluster of personal, individual characteristics that tell us something about longevity. The second aspect of keys to longevity, other than personality, is social support. We often say, this is a centenarian in Fukuoka in Japan, and we always bring a few goodies when we interview them. Of course, I always had great support from my wife Beth here, who was in the picture. So this person was a great social supporter to his wife, who also was a centenarian. They were both centenarians, and lived at home but walked basically to the care facility every day to see his wife. And so we often say, if you want to be 100, you cannot get there by yourself. You do need support. Unfortunately, many centenarians have lost, many people in their 80s or 90s have lost their loved ones, their husband or their wife, but then you need other supports, whether it's children, whether it is a retirement community, friends that you have, whether it is in the care facility, the staff that helps you be your support. You do need social support. And we see that in centenarians, most people have this support. Just a very simple question that we're asking. There are people I can depend on to help me if I really need it. Do you strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree with this statement? And you see data here. We've collected the data in the United States and in Japan. And the basic story here is that for both people in the United States and people in Japan, there's very high agreement. Social support for centenarians is very strong. Most people either strongly agree, almost 70% US centenarians say they strongly agree there's somebody there to help them. And then another 30% agree. Nobody strongly disagrees. We didn't find anybody in the United States or in Japan. And we only found very few, 1 or 2 people who disagreed with this particular statement. So centenarians are not isolated. They do have help. And that's important to recognize. The second part of the story here is to look at Japan. Well, we asked this question in our study with Japanese centenarians. 100%, everybody strongly agreed. As a matter of fact, they were curious why we were asking this question, because they thought, well, of course I have support. My family, the community is here for me. And so even though the support is also very high among American centenarians, it's extremely high, we could not find anybody who was isolated and said, well, no, I don't have the support. Nobody helps me if I need it. So you need more support as you get older. It doesn't mean you need support from a lot of people, but you need somebody who's there to help you and to support you. Here, a centenarian whom I visited in the library of a care facility, had a great time. You can see this is some of the work we take with us, but really most of the fun is the informal conversations that we hold with them. And I want to talk about cognitive functioning, because this is something that most people, if you all here, I might ask you how many of you are concerned about your memory. And a lot of hands in this, for people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s will go up and say, yes, I'm mostly concerned about memory functioning, about Alzheimer's disease, about problems with my brain, that I cannot think, and I may not even recognize somebody if I get very, very old. So that's what we're testing in here with what's called the Mini Mental Status Exam, or the MMSE. And there are basically 30 questions that are being asked to people. And you can get all of them right, then you would get a 30, or you get some of them right, then you're in here. Or unfortunately, we do have some centenarians, highly demented, who will not get any of these questions right. And so that's what we're testing in here. And again, there are 2 stories in here. First, look at the variation of it. Each one of these dots is the frequency of people who are in Japan, here the red line, and in blue, United States, who answer these questions correctly. 30 correct answers in here, no correct answers in here. And so there's great variations. We have people here who get everything right. And we have, unfortunately, people who get everything wrong, and almost an equal distribution along the way. And so there are great individual differences. Not everybody will age well, but of course we want to push these people further up. That's what healthy aging and healthy longevity is all about. And then the second point that we see is at the extremes. So right here in the middle, there's almost no difference between centenarians in Japan and centenarians in the United States. But in the United States, we have more people, significantly more people, who perform extremely well. Get 28 out of 30, 29 out of 30, 30 out of 30. And so we are very, very proud. This is really where we all want to be, but it is not everybody who makes it. Of course, these scores are also very good in here. And then you can see this very, very large number of Japanese centenarians who are alive, but who are basically very, very demented, that they can't even tell you what day it is of the week or what season of the year we are in. And so there are some obviously here in the United States too, but the number of centenarians who are very, very compromised with regard to cognitive health is higher in Japan. Now, truth be told, this is trainable. We can train, and there are some studies, longitudinal studies out of Seattle that have shown that if you take a group of people who are lower or who have declined and you train them, that at follow-up testing they can increase their scores. And we've seen this in some of our follow-up testing too, that we had some centenarians when we retested them, tested them 4 times in a given year, that there were, for some people, increases in these scores. So this is not something that either you do well on or not. Cognitive functioning is trainable, but you have to train your brain. Just like you have to train your body. If you do not read, if you do not engage in conversations with other people, every time, if you don't attend prime time live seminars, every time you do this, you engage your brain. Your brain cells are being activated. You form new synapses. So that is really the key, is to stay active cognitively with crossword puzzles, challenging yourself, maybe learning a new language, learning a new musical instrument. All of that really, we know, makes a difference. Of course, the big one that people often talk about is health behaviors. And here, I'm probably not going to tell you anything new, but I always show this slide because it really demonstrates some of the big issues in here. These are the big 3 health behaviors that maybe not to that extreme, but that many of us are still having problems with. Of course, smoking is a big one. Smoking accounts for a lot of deaths, for a lot of unhealthy behaviors in this country, and I'll give you some more data on that in a minute. Nothing against a good sandwich, but overeating is really a problem in this country and around the world for that matter. And then inactivity, the couch potato, as my friend Warren Franke would always call it. And here you see it proverbially. If smoking, poor diet, and physical inactivity were controlled, we could avoid 35% of all deaths in the United States. Every 3rd death, taking away now the COVID, a problem because this is fairly new, but every 3rd death in the United States typically, in a typical year, is caused by one of these things: smoking, overeating, or being overweight. And we could have a 1/3 of people alive after the end of the year if we could control this in a regular, normal fashion. Now, here's some good news about smoking. If you look at the smoking rates over a 20-year period here from 1990 to 2010, or the latest available period, you see that every country has decreased in smoking rates. So anything below this scale in here is lower than the 20 years before that. The best one is Denmark, which reduced smoking rates by about 55%. Here's the average. Here's the United States. We're not number 1, but we're doing reasonably well with 45% reduction in smoking. And only one country has increased in smoking rates over those 20 years, and that was Russia, although more recently their rates have gone down too. So that's the good news. However, the not so good news is that smoking rates are still, from our perspective, too high in the United States, and certainly surprisingly so also in Japan, our record holder of longevity. If you look here in the United States, our smoking rates are still close to 20% for men, and about 15% of all women of adult age are currently still smoking. In Japan, surprisingly, more than 30% of men smoke, and 10%, so that is significantly lower, of all women in Japan are current smokers. This is all adults, not people at very old ages. And so even though we have decreased, those smoking rates are still surprisingly high. Now again, here in Ames and in Iowa in general, we're doing much better. I think our smoking rate here in Ames, last that I saw, is less than 10% overall. So we're doing better. And of course, we've been some of the pioneers in not allowing smoking in restaurants, and that has contributed to some of those lower rates, as it were. We've also looked at smoking rates among centenarians. And here's something that's really quite compelling. Even though you see sometimes pictures of centenarian smoking, that's really, really the exception. In the United States, only 2.9% of all centenarians are smokers, and then they're not heavy smokers. 25% are ex-smokers, so they quit at some point, which certainly helps too. But 72% have never, ever smoked in their lives. And this is what I hear over and over again when I talk to centenarians: I've never smoked. 82% in Japan never smoked. So that certainly is a major contributor to longevity, people who refrain from smoking. Of course, we talked about diet, and so I'm not going to go in much detail on it. A lot of this you already know. Eating a plant-based diet, green, yellow vegetables is sort of the blue zone approach. For some of you who've heard that. Limiting sugars and grains, certainly important. Eating more soy and other legumes. Using herbs and spices instead of salt and flavor food. Enjoying meals with family and friends, the social aspect of it. And then coming out of Japan, the notion that only eat until you are 80% full. Now, I would already be happy if people would eat until they're 100% full, because we often go to 110, 120, 130% because we like to eat. But parents tell all their children in Japanese, ha hachibume, which means only eat until you're about 80% full. And I couldn't believe it. I asked the students in Japan, did your parents tell you this? And they all told me, yes, of course, we grew up with this. So again, moderation is a very, very important part. This is the combination, what is the overlap between Okinawa and Mediterranean diet, which are both really emphasized in here. And I really, if I have to pick out, it's not a specific food. It's not the green beans or the broccoli or the fish. There's a lot less fish consumption in Japan than you might think, but it is really the overeating that I think causes us a lot of problems. You can see here's the United States in the 1930s, about 100 years ago. Average caloric intake was 3,249 calories per person. And now here we are in the 2000s, so we have moved up to 3732. And of course, 20 years later, that has even increased more. And the same is true also in England. They started a little lower. The increase is not quite as steep. Asian countries are different. We have data here from China, and they started much, much lower, and they are catching up. So it's, the average person, active person, only needs about 2,500 calories per day, and all of these numbers are well above that, and we really need to do better in this. Same is true with physical activity. Worldwide, physical inactivity causes heart disease, diabetes, cancer. If inactivity was decreased by only 10% or by 25%, more than 500,000 deaths could be averted. If it is 10%, if we could decrease inactivity by 25%, we could save more than 1.3 million deaths every year. And so again, this is not something that either you have or you don't have. We can all increase physical activity a little bit more. The benefits for physical activity are clear. I'm not going to go into all detail, but it has physical health benefits, increasing your good cholesterol, preventing a lot of diseases. It has mental health benefits, reducing stress, anxiety, depression. And of course, it has financial benefits too, because increasing physical activity could reduce the direct medical costs here in the United States by $77 billion every year. Think about this. $77 billion we pay, not for the entire healthcare system, just because people are inactive. And so that really is important to recognize. And that's why here, Vicky talked about the Healthiest Aims initiative. We focus on these four aspects. Physical activity is important. Chronic disease management is important. So if you want to prevent hypertension, diabetes, or if you want to manage it, staying connected in the community, the social aspect I talk about, and then of course healthy food choices. Those are the four focus areas that we believe in AIMS and everywhere else contribute to everything. And now of course you say, oh, well, how should I exercise? Well, we have created and tested a home-based activity program for older adults through Healthiest Aims, together with Mary Greeley, Heartland Senior Services, the Ames Public Library, and Iowa State. And we tested out a wonderful workout book that I talked briefly about during my resilience talk. And this little brochure of 13 exercises, easy to do exercises at home for everybody, is available online. Here's the link. You can write me an email if you want me to send you a copy of it. We use it now, my wife and I, if we can't go out because it's a rainy or bad day. And we recommended that out of those 13 exercises, you do half of it every day, and you get the Sunday off. And then we did this for 8 weeks. Here, instructing people in their own homes, came back for a retest. We saw significant increases in fitness, significant increases in strength and flexibility, but also, interesting enough, we tested cognitive function and life satisfaction. And both of those markers increased too, because we know that body and mind work together, and certainly there is a great benefit for that as well. Generally, centenarians tell us that they see their health as excellent or good. Very few people do indicate that their health is poor. Here is the big problem, and again, the difference in life expectancy between the United States and Japan and other countries. Our obesity rate right now, very recent data, is 38%. More than 38% of all Americans are obese. Not just overweight, not just a few pounds that you want to lose, but severely overweight, more than every third person. And we are moving very close to half of the population. In Japan, the same measures, only 4% of the population is obese. We have to work on better eating behaviors in this country. I'm almost running out of time in here. I just want to talk about emotional health. The one aspect that I always emphasize is even though emotional health is usually pretty good, only 6% say they are sad, only 9% say they're angry, but a third of our centenarians say that they feel worthless, that they don't have a purpose in life. So that's certainly something we have to focus on. The lack of positive emotions. These are 3 age groups. In your 60s, people feel very positive. In the 80s, you're beginning to see a slow decline. These are longitudinal data. And then here you see the steep decline for centenarians, even after 20 months, major decrease in emotional health. And then functional health, equally important. These are the things that you need to do every day: talking on the phone, walking, going shopping, cooking, housework, money management. And you can see these younger age groups, 100%, almost 100%, have no problem with any of these tasks. Even in your 80s, close to 90%, 9 out of 10 have no problems. Sorry, the green graph may be a little weak in here, but you can see the big drop. Only 10% say they have no trouble walking. Only 20% can go shopping, cooking. So that is something happens between 80 and 100 that we really need to focus on. And here again, the change over time. 14 is the top score in all these activities. Almost no change over time for sexagenarians. 80s, a slight decline in here. Centenarians already start a lot lower and then continue to decline more dramatically, what we call accelerated change. That's certainly something that we all need to work on. The good news is that the scores in the United States for centenarians are consistently high at every age when compared to centenarians in Japan, where the activity scores are somewhat lower. So I'm going to show you our latest data on the health and retirement study, and then I'll finish up. This study is a longitudinal study of people starting to look in 1992, and we ask what changes from 70 to 100? Who makes it from 72 to 100 and who does not? And here are the positive predictors that you can see. The biggest one is gender. As you can see, you have a 120% better chance to make it from 70 to 100 if you're a woman compared to a man. So I might just tell you, if you want to make it to 100, you men out there, behave more like women do. And I really mean it, because women are so much better in eating, in health behaviors, in not smoking, so all of that is related to it. Interesting enough, the question, have you ever had alcohol? Yes, the answer is, if you say yes, you have a 40% better chance of surviving to 100 than if you say no, I've never drank alcohol. Good cognition, 10% increase. Having the number of children also predicts longevity. And here are the negative aspects. Here's your smoking. Almost a 70% decrease in longevity if you smoke. And of course, being in good health or in bad health also reduces your chances to make it from 70 to 100. Interestingly enough, your parents' longevity has no significant effect on your longevity in here. Well, I think I've run out of time.
If you've got time, we've got time.
I can talk about the secret?
Yeah.
I thought I had strategically run out of time. Okay, you want to know the secret? Okay, I won't share the secret with you. Vicky has convinced me to do so. So here it is. Here are the core dimensions. Here's the secret of longevity. I will reveal it for you, as you'll see here in this next slide coming up. Wow, look at that. Well, actually, the secret isn't a secret. And I've talked about most of these. Genetics, well, you saw, it doesn't play as much of a role as you thought. Maybe 20% people say of longevity is accounted by genetics. Good personality, remember that resilience that I talked about? Low stress and coping, having good social support, practicing your cognitive health, good health behaviors, smoking, eating, activity, and then physical and mental health. Really, we know a lot about longevity. It's not like it is that much of a secret. But if you want this to take this home as a secret, these are the 6 domains or the 6 components in all of our research and in other groups that have really emphasized this as an important aspect. But it doesn't fall on you naturally. You have to work on your personality. And yes, you can make yourself more robust and resilient. There are resilient programs. That's what I showed earlier on. You can actively work on your social support. You must work on your cognitive health. You must do the best that you can with regard to smoking, eating, and exercise. And you also need to maintain good mental and physical health. And then you have a much, much better chance, not only to live a long life, but to live a healthy, long life. I have a last slide in here that shows how also these historical environmental effects are important. The age of the environment, you know, in the 1850s, we started to have city health departments. Pasteurization of milk played a big role, public health campaigns, the invention of insulin. Then, of course, the age of medicine that started in the 1920s played a big role. Then up to 2000, we had the age of lifestyle, where we emphasized and are still emphasizing, obviously, wellness programs. And now we're entering the age of biotech, the human genome technology that can also help us not only live longer, but live longer better. How did I live to be 100? I took one day at a time, is what a Centenarian says. Every day is a gift. I don't have no magic formula, a Centenarian says. I just went to work, done my job best I could. The years just piled up. How did I live to be 100? I haven't done anything special. I just lived. But I like this last quote. I like all of these. But it means you have to live. And you have to live to its fullest extent to make it. So skip over the summary. You've heard me talk about it. But I do want to finish with a poem from Cecilia Payne, whom we interviewed at 100. And she wrote several Centenarians who write poetry, cognitive engagement. And she writes, age is a quality of mind. If you have left your dreams behind, if hope is lost, if you no longer look ahead, if ambition's fires are dead, then you're old. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Martin. And as always, I always learn something new and pick something up. But like you said, I think we all kind of know this stuff. It's just we need these reminders and that there is some science and research to back it up. So thank you so much for sharing and for coming back again to give a program so quickly. Just want to remind you, we have coming up, our next program will be Wednesday, July 22nd, again at 2 o'clock. Listen to your gut. And then we have a couple programs in August on understanding neuropathy and then mindful eating. Why did you eat that? So maybe that program will help you live a little bit longer as well. Those programs will also be virtual for the time being. This is our plan. As things change, we will keep you posted on any changes we may make. If you have any friends who do not have a computer, we have figured out that we can do these go to webinar. People can call in on their phone and enter an access code and they can listen to what is being said. And so we'll work on sharing that information as well. So thank you for joining us and get out there and enjoy the great day. Thank you.